What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo. So today I'm bringing to you an updated meta-analysis for the February 2019 format. YCS Düsseldorf has just come to a close, and holy shit, this was one of the biggest YCSs of all time, so much so that they split the event into two separate YCSs, so it goes without saying, we have a lot to talk about. So before we get into it, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you guys don't miss a single upload. And if you really love the content that I produce on this channel, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because it's thanks to the support of my patrons and channel members that I can keep bringing you this content on a daily basis. So if you're interested, hit the join button down below or check out the links in the description. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So YCS Düsseldorf had so many players, it had to be split into two separate events. Otherwise, they would have capped it and players would not have been able to play. So there was YCS Düsseldorf 1, which had in the neighborhood of about 2,400 players, and YCS Düsseldorf 2, which I believe was about 400 to 500. So we're going to be covering both of these separately, even though they technically can kind of all go together, and you're going to see a lot of similarities when we get into these pie charts. So kicking things off, here is the top 64 breakdown for YCS Düsseldorf 1. Yes, top 64 because there were so many players, the top cut actually goes up from 32 to 64. And wow. All right. So if you can't really tell, Salamangreat definitely was the star of the show, taking up 28 of the top 64 slots. That's like a 44% representation in top cut for Salamangreat. Now, I gotta be honest, I definitely had high hopes for Salamangreat, but I definitely didn't expect to have this large of an impact on the format, because while the deck is very consistent and good at what it does have its weaknesses, but clearly I was wrong in that regard, and this deck is now the new deck to beat. One of the reasons that's attributed to the deck's success is because of the fact that you have so many people playing Salamangreat in the main event. If you saw the overall representation for the event in general, which I'll probably throw up a graphic on the screen so you guys can see that, there were so many Salamangreat players in attendance. So just by consequence of that, that means there's a very high likelihood, just statistically, that there's going to be a significant number of Salamangreat players making the top cut as well. And that's not taking away from anyone who did manage to make top cut with Salamangreat, because clearly, if it's going to have this high of a representation, the deck has to be good at something. And the key word here is consistency, because Salamangreat is one of the most consistent decks we've seen in a very long time. And again, it's not like this deck produces boards that are like unbreakable boards by any stretch of the imagination. It's the fact that it's able to generate resources and advantage for basically free, and you recur the main combo starter so that you can do everything again next turn. Setting up a board that has something with a, infirmity barrier in Salamangreat Roar, but then also having more negations in the form of hand traps just basically burrowed away in your hand is very good and can honestly be enough to stop most of the decks in the current competitive format. Not to mention, when it needs to, it can turn up the gas and go completely offensive with stuff like Fusion of Fire, going into your Salamangreat Violet Chimera, and just flat out OTKing for no other reason. Salamangreat is the deck to beat this format definitively, without a doubt. And if you're going to any major event in the future, like a regional or even the UDS in Las Vegas coming up this weekend, which I will be attending, then you definitely have to be on the lookout for Salamangreat, because it is going to spread like wildfire. Coming in second, though, we had Danger Thunder Dragon taking up, I think it was like 10 of the top 64 top cut slots, so that's like a 16% rate in the top cut, so that's pretty good. We all thought Danger Thunder Dragon was kind of the best deck before Salamangreat entered the mix. I personally thought Danger Thunder Dragon was still going to excel much further beyond that of Salamangreat's representation, but it's still there, it's in second place, and the deck is still incredibly powerful at what it does. I think one of the big weaknesses now is because with Salamangreat in the format, you've got so many decks that are able to essentially start their combos with like one or two cards, being stuff like Salamangreat and Sky Striker and things like that. They're able to play just a ton of hand traps that are going to try and stop the Danger Thunder deck from going off, and basically if you stop the Danger Thunder Dragon deck at very specific points, even though sometimes hand traps are completely irrelevant, then that's going to slow the deck down, and it's not going to have as much potent of a board as it might if it went uninterrupted. So the likelihood of having multiple hand traps is definitely an issue here, and so you could possibly attribute that to why Danger Thunder Dragon did not see as much of success. However, there is another thing as well, is that Salamangreat's got a very cute combo with a combination of Update Jammer in tandem with BORRELSWORD Dragon, because with both of these, you're going to be able to take your BORRELSWORD Dragon, attack twice, triggering its effect twice, and stealing 2 of your opponent's monsters. And BORRELSWORD Dragon is already the bane of Danger Thunder Dragon's existence, but when you tie that to the fact that it's able to not steal only 1 monster but 2, you can take 2 copies of Colossus, you can take like Colossus and their Zombie Stein, or like you can just take any of their 2 strongest cards on their board, and now they have to fight against that through their next turn, which is a negation under a Colossus with a BORRELSWORD Dragon on the field. And because that deck pretty much uses all of its gas starting into its opening hand, it may be very difficult for Danger Thunder Dragon to come back from that. So that's a cute little combo that Salamangreat can take advantage of because of their Cyberse typing, and definitely something you're going to want to look out for. But definitely don't count Danger Thunder Dragon out. It's not going anywhere. It's still extremely powerful with the amount of extenders that the deck has. Combinations of a card like Chaos Dragon Levianeer and Darkest Diabolus to rip 2 cards out of your opponent's hand before ending on a board of Colossus and multiple negations is still pretty damn good for what it is. That brings us now to Sky Striker though, taking up 9 of the top 64, so that's like a 14 to 15% representation, and overall, that's still pretty good. Sky Striker's had probably some of the highest representation we've seen in YCS's probably for the past several months, so to see that, you know, Sky Striker wasn't the highest represented deck for some time, it's pretty neat. Even in the top cut, it didn't have the highest representation. Usually, Sky Striker always had the highest representation throughout the overall tournament attendance. What is interesting though is that Sky Striker actually had a better conversion rate going into the top cut, meaning that even though less players were playing Sky Striker in the main field, it had more tops representative, or I guess correlated to the number of players that were playing it than compared to something like Danger Thunder Dragon. So that means more Danger Thunder Dragons entered, but less of them ended up making the top 64. So that's kind of an interesting thing to take note of, because that means Sky Striker was more consistently able to make it to the top cut. And frankly, that's kind of what Sky Striker does best. I mean, it's won multiple YCSs now. The deck is super consistent, has an amazing toolbox. This really isn't anything new to anyone who's played the competitive scene for the last several months, but Sky Striker's still able to keep up and actually ended up winning YCS Düsseldorf number 2, which we'll cover here in a little bit. So obviously the deck didn't really do anything differently. It's just been able to adapt and keep doing what it does best by just controlling the board, running the opponent out of resources, and just winning the game from there. I do want to talk about the deck that did end up winning the event, and that is Thomas Rose's Danger ORCUST deck. Now, this isn't the first time we've seen this deck. We saw at Deception and a few others pilot this at YCS Chicago, and honestly, this is an incredibly powerful deck. This was honestly my #1 rogue pick on my top 5 rogue picks for the February 2019 format, because even though it was known, it was a deck that very few people piloted or very few people felt comfortable entering an event with, but this deck is utterly terrifying. When you have a deck that basically can go first and just summon something like Azathoth combo so you can't really play the game, or if it goes second that it plays so many powerful cards that it just BORRELSWORD OTKs you, you know you've got something pretty decent there. Now, this deck, all you really have to do is just get into any Link 2 so that you can go into a Nightmare Mermaid, and if that resolves, it's pretty much game over. Like, that's all that you need to do, and you're gonna be able to BORRELSWORD combo your opponent into oblivion. What's cool about this deck is that it can play through the Salamangreat boards rather easily, since they don't really put up too much resistance in the form of something like Salamangreat Roar and maybe a hand trap or two. This deck doesn't really care about that. It can play under hand traps pretty well, and because it's just so many extenders and going second cards, it's just able to push through these boards and OTK so easily that it honestly doesn't care if it even loses the die roll, and if it goes first, oh, they're just gonna set up Azathoth and there's really not much you can do. What's cool is that 2 copies of this deck managed to make it into the top 64, but they unfortunately played each other in top 64, so I would have been curious, had that not been the case, where they would have went and how far both of them would have gone. But honestly, one of them took first place, so it's a pretty nice deck and something you might want to look into, because I think now that it's taken first, I think a lot more people are going to catch on and maybe experiment with this deck a little bit further. Wrapping up this top 64, though, there were still plenty of other decks making it into the top cut. I mean, there was like 2 copies of Guard Dragon Crusadia, there was 2 versions of Guru Control, you got stuff like True Draco, and I think a Luna Light, and there was also 8 other decks that they didn't even list out. I think amongst them were stuff like Trickstar, and I think there was actually a Blue Eyes deck as well, which I'm trying to get the profile for you guys, so just stick around if you guys want to check that out. But yeah, overall, I still love the diversity of this format, and honestly, I don't think people are really complaining about Salamangreat being the best deck, because yeah, 44% representation may be high, but honestly, the deck is kind of fair for what it is, and with all the diversity still in this format, and obviously we still have some checks and balances in terms of the meta readjusting itself now that we've had this event, I think a lot of people are really enthusiastic and happy about playing Yu-Gi-Oh! At the current moment. Yeah, it's not perfect, but I think it's pretty good, especially considering where we've been these past couple of years. I do want to quickly touch though on YCS Düsseldorf 2. Now remember, this event only had about 400 or 500, maybe 600 at the most. I'm completely forgetting how many, but that doesn't take away from the fact that this wasn't another YCS, because there have been several YCSs in the past that have had about equal representation, especially by Europe standards, so that is something to keep in mind. Also to keep in mind, it's a lot harder to make the top cut because it only cut to a top 16, and you had to get very few losses if you wanted to make that top cut. So here's the top 16 for that event. Looks very similar to what we saw at the top 64 for YCS Düsseldorf 1. We have stuff like Salamangreat and Sky Striker taking up about 50% of this pie chart in totality, and that makes sense because again, these decks are still incredibly strong and haven't really gone anywhere. Then you've got stuff like Danger Thunder Dragon taking up at like 1/8 of the pie chart, Trickstar also taking that up as well, which is a little bit interesting. And then we had a few other decks, like I think there was a Draco, I think a Danger variant, as well as another Luna Light deck. So ultimately, when you kind of look at these two pie charts side by side, they're pretty similar in the fact that the strongest decks are pretty well defined at the current moment. I think that's how things are going to be, at least for the foreseeable future, because we're not getting a ban list for at least another month. There's really no huge product that's going to impact the game anytime soon. So this is what things are going to look like, and obviously the meta is going to adjust and people are going to start to innovate, but this is now the course that the direction of the format is going to take. So guys, that's going to do it for this meta analysis. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think and what you thought about the two YCS Düsseldorf events that took place. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.